The 2026 NFL Draft concluded 1 month ago, and in it, we saw 257 football players find NFL teams. But how did every team actually do in the draft? What were the best and worst picks? In this video, I'm going to be grading every single pick of the 2026 NFL Draft. That's right, all 257 of them. I'm also going to be giving each team their own draft grade based on the culmination of all of their own picks. This took a ton of time, so if you enjoyed this video, then please drop a like and subscribe if you're new. Subscribe takes just a second and it really helps me out. Thank you, and let's get started. We'll start off in the NFC North with the Detroit Lions, who began by addressing their two biggest needs with their first two picks, tackle and edge rusher. Blake Miller in the first round makes a lot of sense. He's a total Dan Campbell kind of player with how physical he is, and he has both a solid floor with high upside. We'll see whether he or Penei Sewell moves over to left tackle, but that's not something I'm worried about. And then Derek Moore on day 2 I thought was a really solid pick. Moore is kind of the opposite of what the Lions currently have at their edge 2 spot in DJ Wonnum. Wonnum is more of a run defense oriented edge rusher, while Moore is a really good pass rusher. His bull rush was deadly at the college level, and I think the two form a nice rotation together. The only reason this isn't an A is because Zion Young was still on the board, and he actually ended up going with the pick after to the Ravens, and I thought Young was a better prospect than Moore. But this was still a good pick. But the good doesn't stop there, as I really liked what the Lions did on day 3. Jimmy Roller was a great pick in the 4th round. He brings a lot to the table in terms of run defense, and he was a great tackler in college, missing under 5% of his tackles in 2025. And then Keith Abney in the middle of the 5th round was one of the steals of the draft. He was only available because he's 5'9", but he played a lot bigger than that. Abney missed just 4.3% of his tackles and had 9 pass breakups in 2025, numbers you don't expect from a 5'9" corner. Plus, he allowed just a 46.1 passer rating when targeted. I think teams just overthought the height on Abney, but I would have been happy with him on day 2, so getting him here is great value. Kendrick Law is a good pick at the end of the 5th round. He didn't have a ton of production, but is very reliable, and he only had 1 drop in 2025 and just 3 drops in his entire college career. Skylar Gill-Howard was another solid pick. He's an undersized, pass rush oriented defensive tackle that did get injured in 2025, but showed flashes. And then Tyre West was a defensive end / defensive tackle hybrid who could develop into a solid backup. They did have a few UDFAs that stood out to me. Luke Altmaier was a decent QB prospect who I thought could have been drafted in the late 6th or 7th round, and Eric Hunter showed some solid run defending ability, though he wasn't Morgan State, so his competition wasn't anything special. Both could have definitely made the roster though. Overall, I give the Lions draft an A. I don't really have any complaints outside of maybe taking Derek Moore over Zion Young, but they addressed all of their main positions of need with good players, and I think this class could really help the Lions get back to their 2023 and 2024 form. The Vikings had 2 goals in mind entering this draft: make Brian Flores happy and turn their locker room into an Arby's, because goddamn did they get the meats. 3 of their first 4 picks are over 320 pounds, and 4 of their first 5 picks have Brian Flores written all over them. They started off with a very surprising and sort of controversial pick in the 1st round, taking Caleb Banks. When healthy, Banks is the best D tackle in this class, but he does have massive injury concerns. He broke his foot twice, and considering he is 6'6", 330 pounds, that's a lot of weight bearing down on that foot. But if he does work out, his ceiling is sky high. The Vikings then had a very busy day 2, making 4 picks, and I thought most of them were good. They took Jake Golday in the 2nd round, and this is a total Brian Flores guy. Golday played a weird slot corner linebacker hybrid role at Cincinnati, but he showed he can do a lot of things: rush the passer, defend the run, or drop back in coverage. Flores is going to have a ton of fun moving this guy around. They then went back to the big boy bin with Dominique Orange, or Big Citrus, which is already one of the best nicknames in the NFL and way better than their current most popular nickname on the Vikings. Orange is a true nose tackle who is ridiculously strong, but his run defense technique does need to be rebuilt from the ground up. There is a chance he's just never able to defend the run at the NFL level, but having Brian Flores coach him up should help things a lot. Caleb Tiernan was another great pick on the opposite side of the trenches. Brian O'Neill isn't getting any younger, and Christian Darrisaw can't seem to stay healthy, so getting a swing tackle with a high pass blocking floor with upside as well is great at the end of the 3rd round. Their final day 2 pick was one I wasn't as big a fan of, mostly because this was the pick the Vikings traded Jonathan Grenard for, and Jacoby Thomas is a very risky player. He's got high upside in my opinion, and he showed some great stuff in coverage, allowing just a 55.8 passer rating when targeted, accompanied accompanied with 5 interceptions and 6 breakups. However, this guy can't tackle for shit. He's had at or around a 20% missed tackle rate his entire college career, and that just doesn't fly in the NFL. Plus, Zakee Wheatley was right there, and I think he's a much better safety prospect that also fits well into this Vikings system. But Thomas does have potential, and he definitely wasn't their worst pick. That was Max Bredesen in the 5th round. I get the Vikings always want their fan-favorite fullback, and Bredesen is a good blocker, but the guy caught 12 passes in 4 years at Michigan, and they passed up on Emmett Johnson to take Bredesen. I thought Johnson could have competed for starting reps in this offense, but instead they got a fullback. They did make up for that pick with their next one in Charles Demings, who, yes, is from Stephen F. Austin. No, I've never heard of that school either, but he did have really good production, and while I don't know how much he'll play in year 1, I think he could develop into a good replacement for one of these current corners. The Vikings did address running back with Damon Claiborne, who's a speed demon but doesn't really bring anything else outside of that, and Gavin Gearhart was a solid center who could be a nice backup for this team. I'm also factoring the Jonathan Grenard trade, as it did happen during draft day. It was factored into the Jacoby Thomas grade, but I want to talk about it separately as well. I don't love this trade for Minnesota, but I don't hate it either. Grenard wanted money the Vikings weren't willing to give, and I think getting 2 third-round picks isn't a bad return. They saved over $12 million in cap, and they do have Dallas Turner ready to fill that edge 1 role, so I think the trade makes sense, even if they are losing a really good player. They did have a couple UDFAs that stood out to me. Safety Jacob Thomas is kind of a poor man's Jacoby Thomas, in the sense that he had good coverage production but couldn't tackle to save his life, so if Jacoby doesn't work out, maybe Jacob will. And they also found offensive lineman Delby Lemieux, who showed solid stuff at Dartmouth before getting injured. Overall, I gave this Vikings draft a B+. There is a lot of risk-reward factor with this draft. Players like Caleb Banks and Jacoby Thomas could turn out to be massive steals or huge busts. This is one of those drafts where we'll just have to wait and see. The Packers didn't have a first-round pick due to the Micah Parsons trade, but I really like what they did with their first pick in the 2nd round, targeting that secondary with Brandon Cisse. Cisse shined in a lot of areas. One of his most predominant traits is his athleticism. He's got true 4.4 speed, but he also moves really well. He can press guys at the line of scrimmage and had good ball production in college. Plus, while he isn't the best tackler, he was still very good against the run. He's able to diagnose and react to things quickly. The Packers had a lot of trouble coming down with interceptions last year, so I think taking someone like Cisse who has good length and ball skills is going to help a lot, so that was a great pick. They then took Chris McClellan in the 3rd round, who's a very solid D tackle. He tackles well and is tough to move. He's not incredible or anything, but I think he finds a way into their D-line rotation. They then took a gamble on athleticism to start day 3. Danny Dennis Sutton had insane testing numbers, running a 4.63 40 at 6'5", 256 pounds. However, his tackling is absolutely awful and he is going to need time to develop, but I like taking this risk in the 4th round. The rest of their day 3 picks were fine to pretty solid. Yeager Burton is a solid backup center with a nice floor and pass protection. Dominic Jackson tackles well, but that's kinda it. And then Trace Smack is, well, a kicker, but taking one makes sense considering the nightmare that was the Packers kicking situation last year. And Smack is a pretty good kicker. I did really like what they did in undrafted free agency. Wide receiver J. Michael Sturdivant was someone I was surprised didn't get drafted on day 3. His production wasn't anything insane, but he only had 1 drop in his final year at Florida and tested really well. That was a great pickup. Josh Gesky was also a pretty solid guard prospect who I think will definitely make this team as a backup. Overall, I gave the Packers draft an A-. Despite not having a first-round pick, I think the Packers for the most part made the most with what they did have, and I think they came out of this draft with a nice haul of players. The Chicago Bears began their draft with one of the biggest steals of the 1st round, taking Dylan Thieneman 25th overall. Thieneman is the best true free safety in this class, and safety was a big need for the Bears after losing both Kevin Byard and Jaquan Brisker in free agency. Thieneman is great in all phases of the game, and he and Kobe Bryant form a nice safety duo. But while I love what the Bears did on day 1, I felt pretty much the opposite with day 2. They took Logan Jones in the 2nd round, and I like addressing interior O-line, but I didn't really like taking a nearly 25-year-old prospect who might not even start day 1 and had his fair share of struggles. He brings a high floor as a pass protector, but struggled more in the run game and is undersized with shorter arms. The 3rd round was just as bad, if not worse. I thought Sam Roush was a solid tight end prospect, but I didn't think the Bears even needed a tight end, and Roush should have some weaknesses on him that didn't make him worth a high 3rd round pick for me, most notably his drop problems and lack of contested catch ability. There were also just some better players at more impactful positions they could have taken. But their pick of Xavier Thomas was definitely their worst one. Thomas has all the makings of your typical day 3 wide receiver who runs really fast and doesn't do anything else. His 4.28 40 time is why he got drafted this high, but that's it. He only had one season in college above 500 receiving yards. He's undersized, can't come down with contested catches, and doesn't have a well-developed route tree. Plus, if they had to go with a speed threat receiver, Brennan Thompson was literally right there. This pick just doesn't make sense to me. Luckily, the Bears did redeem themselves a bit on day 3. Malik Muhammad is a very solid cornerback prospect who had great production paired with nice athleticism, and I think he slots right in as the Bears' CB4. Keyshawn Elliott doesn't bring much as a coverage player and show tackling issues, but he does have good run diagnostics, and to get a high floor run defender in the 5th round is pretty good. And their last pick, Jordan Vandenberg, also brings a nice level of run defense that might even be able to rotate in on early downs. And the Bears didn't have any UDFAs that stood out to me. Overall, I'm giving the Bears draft a C+. The Dylan Thieneman pick was awesome, and I did like what they did on day 3, but their day 2 picks really dragged down this grade. The Cardinals are our first NFC West team, and they shocked the world by taking Jeremiah Love 3rd overall, and I have a lot of mixed feelings about this pick. On one hand, Love is a generational running back prospect who will likely be a top 5 player at his position by the time he enters his prime. However, this is very similar to the Ashton Jeanty pick from last year, and that didn't end so well from the Raiders. The Cardinals have an awful O-line, so there's only going to be so much Love will be able to do. Plus, the Cardinals already have 3 starting caliber running backs on their roster, so running back really wasn't a position of need for them, especially when they have so many other needs on this roster. I think it would have been a much better process for them to try and trade back and accumulate picks to fill all those needs. Or even if they couldn't trade back, players like Francis Mauigoa or Ruben Bain were right there. This pick gets a B- because Love is such a good player, and in a few years will probably be one of the best running backs in this league, but I don't love the process. Their next pick wasn't any better in my opinion. I like Chase Basantos, but not as the 34th overall pick. He's athletic and has upside, but he's not a great run blocker and doesn't have the best anchor and pass protection. Plus, Emmanuel Pregnon was right there, and I thought he was a much better prospect. Jennings Dunker too. So yeah, not the best pick. But nothing they did was even close to as bad as taking Carson Beck at the top of the 3rd round. This might have been the worst pick in the entire draft, not just because it was a reach, but because it makes absolutely no sense. This is almost a 2nd round pick. You should absolutely be looking for starters at positions of need, and the Cardinals have a ton of needs. And to be honest, at least for this season, quarterback is not one of them. Even if Jacoby Brissett doesn't work out, Gardner Minshew can step in and be decent for you, and then in 2027, draft a QB in what is looking like a loaded draft class. Carson Beck is a backup quarterback that shouldn't have gone into the late 3rd round at the earliest, and he will not be starting for you in 2027. What was the point of spending the 65th overall pick in the draft on him? It makes absolutely no sense. Their next pick was much better though. Caleb Proctor is a nice pass rushing oriented D tackle that can rotate in on 3rd downs, so I like that one, and then the rest of their day 3 picks were just fine. Reggie Virgil had solid production at Texas Tech, but did have some drop problems and isn't very athletic. Carson Shahar is an athletic linebacker with tackling issues, and Jaden Williams is a decent pass blocker, but not that good in the run game. All 3 will likely make the team as backups. They did have one UDFA that stood out to me in Harrison Wallace. He's smaller and not athletic at all, but he did have good production at Ole Miss, and I think he can make the team. Overall, I gave the Cardinals draft a D+. I wasn't the biggest fan of taking Jeremiah Love or Chase Basantos at their respective spots, and the Carson Beck pick was absolutely terrible. Their best pick was a 4th round D tackle, and that didn't even crack the A's, so yeah, I didn't like this draft very much. The 49ers had a very polarizing draft, some picks I really liked and others not so much. They started by trading down multiple times, taking themselves out of the 1st round, and then they selected Dejon Stribling with their 1st pick, and I just don't like it. Stribling was not worth what is almost a 1st round pick. I mean, yeah, the guy is really fast and he does have good hands, just 1 drop in 2025, but the contested catch rate is very lackluster and his route running is not very good. I get that the 49ers want a true speed threat to couple them in Mike Evans or Ricky Pearsall, but they didn't need to spend the 33rd overall pick on this player. Plus, Denzel Boston and Jeremy Bernard were right there, and I know those two don't have the same skill set as Stribling, but they were just much better prospects. At least they traded down, but this wasn't a good pick. However, their next pick was much better. Romello Height is a great addition to this edge room. Targeting edge makes sense after Micah Williams only played 9 games in his rookie season and wasn't all that great doing it. He's more of a run defense oriented edge rusher, and Romello Height is more pass rush oriented, so those two complement each other really well. I think they'll make a good rotation opposite Nick Bosa. However, but the polarization of this draft continues, and I absolutely hated their next pick. Not only was Keelan Black a reach, but drafting a running back here doesn't make any sense to me. Obviously, they already have CMC, but they also have Jordan James, who they drafted last year, and they have Isaac Correndo, who's shown a lot of flashes. And like I said, Black was a reach, and a big one at that. He's smaller and doesn't have high-end speed, and he brings absolutely nothing in the receiving game. And I also think Black will barely see the field, if at all, and this just looks like the 49ers lighting a third-round pick on fire. However, day 3 was much better. Grayson Halton was a great pick. He's basically a die version of Oso Odigizua, so if he does go down, you have someone who can fill right in. Harvard Willis is a nice shot at upside, though his pass blocking is a real concern. Evanesian's price talk brings length that this corner room just doesn't have. He's 6'4" with 33-inch arms, and I think he finds a way on the field simply because he has traits nobody else in this corner room has. Jaden Ducker is another athletic guy, but didn't really produce much, and Enrique Cruz is a freak athlete who wasn't very good in college, but should find his way onto the team. They did have one UDFA that stood out to me, edge rusher Mikhail Kamara. He's a really interesting player. He's 6 feet, 250 pounds, and didn't test very well, but he didn't produce at a high level in terms of pass rushing, so I think there might be something there. Overall, I gave the 49ers a C-. They did make some picks that I really liked, but they also made some real head scratchers, especially on day 2. This will be a very interesting draft to look back on in a few years. The Rams only had 5 picks in this draft, and their first one shocked everybody as they took Ty Simpson 13th overall. There are a lot of mixed feelings about this pick, and arguments from both sides make sense. On one hand, the Rams are in a Super Bowl window that will likely only be open for a couple more years, as Matthew Stafford is 38 years old. Dropping a day 1 impact player like Ruben Bain or Mekhi Lemon would have increased the chance they win a Super Bowl in the next few seasons. However, what this pick does do is secure the future. Simpson only had 15 starts in college. He's definitely not someone you want playing right away, but now he'll get to develop under Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay, so by the time Stafford retires, Simpson will hopefully be ready to step in. I ultimately lean toward this being a good pick because securing the future is important, and also, this Rams roster is so good that while getting someone like Mekhi Lemon would have obviously helped, I don't know if it would have helped enough to warrant passing on an opportunity to get your next franchise quarterback. However, Ty Simpson was their best pick of the draft, and that's saying something. I really did not like what they did on day 2. Max Clare in the second round isn't the worst value, but taking a tight end here doesn't make sense to me. You already have Colby Parkinson, who I think is underrated, and you have Terrence Ferguson, who you drafted in the second round last year. Even Tyler Higbee is still here. Talk about not getting an impact player. Max Clare is probably not even going to see the field, and there were wide receivers available who could have filled that number 2 spot. Maybe in a few years, Clare turns into a nice tight end 2 alongside Ferguson, but I just didn't like this pick. Keegan Trost wasn't much better. He had a breakout 2025 season, but is a 25-year-old prospect with 1 good season of tape, and he doesn't have good traits. He can probably spot start as a high 4 backup if needed, but nothing more. Both of their day 3 picks were fine. CJ Daniels had 1 great season at Liberty, but wasn't able to repeat that production once he actually started playing against higher competition. He does have good hands though, and Tim Keenan is an unathletic but large run defender that probably makes this team as a Poon Ford backup. And there were any UDFAs that stood out to me. Overall, I gave the Rams draft a D+. The Ty Simpson pick was already controversial enough, but I really didn't like how they supported that first round pick with their later picks. If Simpson turns out to be the next franchise quarterback, then that's great, but I don't think they got any 2026 starters here, and that's just not good. The defending Super Bowl champions are up next, and they had by far the best draft in their division. They started by taking Jadarian Price with the last pick in the first round, and I've seen some hate for this pick, but I actually think it makes a lot of sense. Kenneth Walker is no longer on this team, and who knows how much Zach Charbonnet is even going to play this season. Price was by far the second best running back in this class, so I think getting someone that is more than starting caliber at the very end of the first round was a good process. Bud Clark in the second round was another good pick. The Seahawks actually attacked secondary quite a bit in this draft, and I think they did a good job with that overall. Clark is an undersized but athletic safety who had really good ball production at TCU. His tackling isn't amazing, but I think he can find a role in the Seahawks defense. Julian Neal was their next pick, another defensive back, and I like this one as well, though not as much as Clark. Neal also had good ball production and is good size, but doesn't move very well. His length will serve him in the league, though. They started day 3 with another good pick in B.U. Stevens. Stevens is similar to Keegan Trost from the Rams draft in the sense that he's also broke out in his final season of college, except Stevens isn't 25 years old. He's more athletic, he was better than Trost in that final year, and he was drafted 55 picks later in the 5th round, where Trost was supposed to go. So yeah, I like that pick, and I mean, anyone is better than Anthony Bradford. Emmanuel Henderson was a fine pick. He only had one real season of production and at a high drop rate, but did come down with 75% of his contested catches and have some speed, so I thought that was at least an interesting flyer in the 6th round. And then all of their 7th round picks ranged from fine to pretty solid. Andre Fuller is a relatively unathletic corner that had good ball production and tackles well. Devin Eastern is your typical late round nose tackle with tackling issues but good size. And Michael Dansby had decent coverage production but is undersized and an awful tackler. And there were any UDFAs that stood out to me. Overall, I give the Seahawks draft a B. I think they did a very solid job addressing their positions of need, and unlike all the other teams in this division, they didn't make any picks I was overly critical of. This was a sound process by the dark side. The New Orleans Saints kick off the NFC South, and I actually think they had a pretty solid draft. I wasn't the biggest fan of the Jordan Tyson pick, however. Not that I don't like Tyson, I do, but I don't like the process of taking an injury-prone receiver when you already have an injury-prone receiver. I would have much rather seen Mekhi Lemon go here because there's a real chance that at some point, both Chris Olave and Jordan Tyson are out and you're right back in receiver hell. But if Tyson can stay healthy, he's a phenomenal player. I did really like taking Christian Miller in the 2nd round. He's a fantastic run-defending D tackle, and the Saints don't exactly have the best run defenders in the D-line right now. Both Brian Bresee and Devon Godshaw were pretty bad against the run last year, so I think Miller's going to have a very prominent role in this defense. Oscar Delp was another good pick. He's very similar to Noah Fant, who's already on this team. They have nearly the exact same measurables. Delp didn't have a ton of production in college, but Noah Fant isn't going to be on this team forever, and I think Delp can develop into a similar quality player, if not better. Their day 3 was mostly good, but I did think taking Jeremiah Wright in the 4th round was a little early, even if it was at the end of said round. He's an absolute mountain of a human being, but he really struggled in pass protection throughout college, so we'll see if he can develop, but I was more comfortable with him in the later 5th to 6th round. Bryce Lance 4 picks later was a great selection, however. He had over 2,000 yards and 25 touchdowns in his final 2 seasons of college, and he's an athletic freak. He's 6'3", 204 pounds, and runs a 4.34 40-yard dash. You just don't find that many players with that height and speed combination. The reason he fell to the end of the 4th round was because he didn't exactly play against the best competition at North Dakota State, but I think he has a lot of upside and he'll provide good competition for that wide receiver 3 spot. Lorenzo Styles was also a good pick at where they got him. Just like his brother, he's an athletic freak. He ran a 4.28 40-yard dash. However, he wasn't great in coverage and definitely is more of a developmental type. Barian Brown is a speedy receiver with hands issues, so that was fine, and I actually think TJ Hall in the 7th round was good value. He's a slower, undersized corner who is actually really good in run defense, so maybe he carves out a role as a slot defender or something. They actually had one UDFA I really liked, hence the B- grade, and that was Michael Heldman. He didn't have the best competition at Central Michigan, but he had really good pass rush production and has a lot of athleticism, so I think that was a great pickup. Overall, I gave the Saints draft a B. You can only get so high of a grade when your 1st round pick gets a C+, and I do think Mekhi Lemon would have been a better pick in that spot, but I do think the Saints came out with a lot of good players, and if Tyson can stay healthy, this will climb into the A's very quickly. The Falcons did have a 1st round pick in this draft, but that didn't stop it from being very interesting and very polarizing. But we'll start with the positives because I absolutely love what they did on day 2. They started with Avion Terrell, AJ Terrell's brother, in the 2nd round, and I think this pick is universally recognized as a steal. Terrell was a late 1st round corner for me, and with him in there, Mike Hughes finally doesn't have to start anymore. I also really love their 3rd round pick, Zachariah Branch. The Falcons desperately needed receiver help. Drake London is their only legitimate option. He fills that big outside X receiver role, and Branch is the complete opposite. He's small, just 5'9", 177 pounds, but he's extremely fast, has great hands, and despite being as small as he is, he's actually fairly strong and holding over 60% of his contested catches. I think he's going to have a very prominent role in this offense, and I absolutely loved this pick. However, while I thought the Falcons did amazing on day 2, they didn't do so well on day 3. Kendall Daniels at the end of the 4th round was a massive reach. The only thing he has going for him is size and length, but he's extremely slow, a bad tackler, and had almost no ball production in his final 2 years of college. This is a backup linebacker that shouldn't have gone any earlier than the 6th round, so this was not a good pick. Ontario Thompson was fine. He's quick and tackles well, but that's kind of it. Harold Perkins was their best day 3 pick. He's a nice spin on athleticism, but isn't a very good football player, especially when it comes to tackling, where he's awful. And then Ethan Anyawa was also a really bad pick. It's hard to get anything lower than a C with a 7th round pick, but Anyawa was awful at Rice and then didn't even start in 2025 at Ohio State. Plus, he didn't have any athletic traits. If you can't even start in college, you aren't doing anything in the NFL. And then they didn't have any UDFAs that stood out to me. Overall, I gave the Falcons draft an A-. Even with their bad day 3, I absolutely loved their day 2 as they still managed to find 2 starters with upside despite not having a first round pick, and that has to be commemorated. Spoiler alert, the Bucs had one of the best drafts in the entire NFL, and that started by stealing Ruben Bain 15th overall. This was one of, if not the best pick in the entire draft. Bain was the top 3 player in this class. How the Bucs managed to get him at 15 is something I will never understand. I already talked about the Bain pick twice now. Honestly, analysis isn't really needed. You all know how incredible Bain is and how incredible this pick was. But Bain wasn't their only good pick. Josiah Trotter in the 2nd round is a very intriguing pick. He's the son of former All-Pro linebacker Jeremiah Trotter. Josiah absolutely stands out as a run defender. He's one of the best run defending linebackers in this class. And considering both the Bucs starting linebackers are not the best in run defense, this pick makes a lot of sense. Trotter does struggle more in coverage, but I think getting a high floor early down run defender in the 2nd round is good value. They then took Ted Hurst in the 3rd round, and I know there's going to be some people who think this was a steal. I like Hurst, but I think this was a good range for him. The 9% drop rate really isn't good, and honestly, I would have liked to see him climb above a 60% contested catch rate considering he's 6'3". But Hurst is still a good prospect, and I think he has a legit shot to win the wide receiver 3 job. They then had another really good pick with Keontae Scott in the 4th round. I almost gave this pick an A+, but Scott's lack of any real tackling ability and the fact that he can be over-aggressive in coverage led to me giving it an A, which is still a really good grade obviously because I thought this was awesome value. Scott projects as a nickel corner in the NFL, and I think he fits really well into this defense. He is extremely fast, a great run defender despite the tackling issues, and plays zone very well. I think Todd Bowles is really going to like this guy, and this was a great pick. DeMonte Capehart in the 5th round was fine. He's got good size and athleticism, but isn't a very good pass rusher. Billy Schroth 5 picks later was great though. He has serious durability concerns, which is why he was even available in the first place, but he was really good at Notre Dame, especially in 2025 where he allowed just 2 pressures on 213 pass blocking snaps. And then Bauer Sharp is an athletic tight end that really didn't produce much, but this was a fine pick. They did have 2 UDFAs that stood out to me. Jalen Daniels I thought was a draftable quarterback in the late 6th or 7th round, and Eric Rivers is a nice bit on speed. Overall, I give this Bucs draft an A+. Getting Ruben Bain at 15 already guarantees a super high grade, but the Bucs made a bunch of other picks that I really liked and didn't have any picks I was overly critical of. This was an incredible draft. The Panthers closed out an NFC South full of great drafts as they made a lot of amazing picks. Starting off with Monroe Freeling, who is probably the highest upside out of any tackle in this class. And I think taking a tackle makes sense considering Ihima Kwanu is likely not playing next season, and who knows if he'll even be on the team in 2027. They then took Lee Hunter in the middle of the 2nd round, and I think this pick makes a lot of sense as well. Hunter is one of the best true nose tackles in this class, and current nose tackle Bobby Brown wasn't exactly great last year, so it'll be good to get some young competition that could start for them as early as week 1. They then stole Chris Brazzell in the 3rd round. Brazzell is a 6'4 receiver who runs a 4.37 40-yard dash and had a breakout 2025 season at Tennessee, putting up over 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns. He did have severe drop problems earlier in his college career, but cleaned those up in 2025 and had just 2 drops, so I'm not too worried about his hands. I think Brazzell has a real opportunity to take Xavier Leggett's job, and don't be surprised if Brazzell is out there week 1 while Leggett is sitting on the bench. Will Lee in the 4th round was their lowest graded pick of the draft, and I still think it was a fine pick. Lee brings size and length to this corner room, and his jumping ability is truly special, even if his actual speed isn't great. They then had 2 more A+ graded picks in the 5th round. Sam Hecht isn't the craziest guy, but his production speaks for himself. He had just a 1.7% pressure rate allowed, and he didn't allow a single sack in his entire college career. I genuinely think he could start in the NFL, and the Panthers do have an open center spot, with their only other competition being Luke Fortner. And then Zakee Wheatley was their other 5th round steal. He also doesn't have the most outstanding traits, but I thought he was really good in coverage. I mean, he was only targeted 10 times in the entire 2025 season and allowed just 36 yards. The Panthers absolutely stole the 5th round. And then their final pick of Jason Kuwach was another solid one. He's a fairly athletic linebacker who's a good tackler but didn't play all that much in college, so he's going to need a lot of coaching before he's ready to step on an NFL field. And then they didn't really have any UDFAs that stood out to me. Overall, I gave the Panthers an A+. They had quite literally no bad picks, and having 5 picks graded in the A's with 3 of those being A+ out of only 7 picks is going to get you that A+. This was a phenomenal draft. draft. Our final division in the NFC is the NFC East, and we'll kick things off with the Giants. They had 2 top 10 picks after trading away Dexter Lawrence, and I really liked both of them. Orville Reese falling to them was not expected, and edge rusher definitely isn't a position of need, but the talent was too good to pass up. Plus, Reese could start at linebacker like he did in college and then move to edge later, which is where I think he'll ultimately end up. This also opens up opportunities to trade Brian Burns or Kayvon Thibodeau in the future, but I really like taking Francis Mauigoa at pick 10 even more. This was great value. Mauigoa is the best offensive lineman in this class, and he has both guard and tackle flexibility. He's able to fill in wherever the Giants need him, and they need anything to ensure Daniel Falele isn't starting. The Giants then made 2 really good picks on day 2, starting with Colton Hood at the top of the second round. Hood was a late first to early second round cornerback prospect, so the value is there. The run defense isn't great, but Hood is a good tackler and great in coverage, especially press man, and he has good ball production. He's also only 21 years old. I don't know how much he'll play in year 1, but I think he has the potential to develop into a really good corner for the Giants. Malachi Fields was their second day 2 pick, this one in the middle of the third round. Fields is a true X receiver. He's 6'4", 218 pounds with a 38-inch vert. The problem is that he is very slow. He ran just a 4.6 140, and I don't think he has the upside to be anything more than a good X receiver. But that skill set is not something the Giants currently have, and I think he carves out a nice role for himself in this offense. They then didn't make any picks until the 6th round, where they made 3 of them. Bobby Jamison Traces is your typical day 3 nose tackle. Lots of size, but that's about it. JC Davis is actually a pretty high floor run blocker, so I thought that was a good pick. And Jack Kelly is a total bet on athleticism, which is fine for the 6th round. And they didn't have any UDFAs that stood out to me. Overall, I gave the Giants draft an A. They made the absolute most of the high draft capital they had, and they didn't make any picks I disliked. Great draft overall. The Commanders probably didn't expect to see themselves picking at 7 after the 2024 season they had, but here they are. And they were the team that decided to gamble on Sonny Styles. Styles is a fascinating prospect. He's an athletic freak with sky-high potential. But that's the thing. He needs to reach that Fred Warner level ability in order to justify taking a linebacker with a top 10 pick. That is a big ask. Plus, both Ruben Bain and Caleb Downs were still on the board here, and I would have much rather seen the Commanders take either one of them. But I think Styles can still be really good for them. Antonio Williams in the 3rd round I wasn't as big of a fan of. They desperately needed a receiver, and Williams does provide some nice speed from the slot, and he has really good hands. But I do think there were better wide receivers available, like Zachariah Branch and Chris Basil, which is why this grade is a C+. It'll be interesting to see which of all these 3rd round receivers actually ends up being the best, but as I did see them as prospects, I don't think the Commanders took the best one available. I did really like what they did on day 3, however. Joshua Josephs had really good pass rushing production and isn't a bad run defender either. However, the reason he was available in the 5th round is because of his tackling, which is absolutely awful. But if that can get cleaned up, I think Josephs can be pretty good. Keyshawn Allen was another great pick in the 6th round. He isn't the fastest, but he has solid size and had great production at Penn State, 1,300 yards and 15 touchdowns in his final year. And then Matt Goldman I think was a sneaky great pick. He didn't get a ton of attention because he played at Michigan State and didn't test very well, but he held up great when he did play against tough competition like Michigan and Indiana, so I think he could be a really solid backup in the NFL and maybe even start at some point. I think Kalig-Manis in the 5th round was the only day 3 pick I wasn't as big of a fan of, because I would have rather seen the Commanders take Garrett Nussmeier, who I thought was a much better prospect, but a 7th round pick isn't going to kill that grade. And there weren't any UDFAs that stood out to me. Overall, I gave the Commanders draft a B. There were some spots, most notably with their first 2 picks, where I think there were better players the Commanders could have taken, but I think they did awesome on day 3, and if Sonny Styles is able to reach his upside, this draft is going to look really good. The Cowboys had quite literally the most polarizing 1st round one can have, an A+ with 1 pick and an F with another. We'll start with the absolute incredible pick of Caleb Downs, 11th overall. Downs was a top 7 player in this class and the best defensive back, so to get him at 11 is fantastic value. He's got a ton of versatility, and I think he could develop into the next Al Hamilton type safety, which will help this defense a ton. However, their next pick of Malachi Lawrence was one of the worst picks in the entire draft. Not just because of who they took, but the process they took to get to that pick. The Cowboys traded down with their division rival Eagles down from 20 to 23. Guess who the Eagles took with that shiny new 20th overall pick? Mekhi Lemon, arguably the best receiver in this class. The Cowboys then took Lawrence, who was a mid-second round edge rusher at best. Not just that, but trading down meant they lost out on Akeem Mesidor, the most pro-ready edge rusher in this class, as he went the pick before to the Chargers. I can't make it clear enough. The Cowboys traded down and handed their division rival one of the best players in this class, causing them to lose out on another one of the better players in this class, all for them to reach on a 2nd round prospect. If that doesn't warrant an F, I don't know what does. They did luckily make a great pick in the 3rd round with Jason Barham. Barham is a fascinating prospect because he has experience at both linebacker and edge rusher. He's a really good run defender, and I think the Cowboys are going to be able to plug him in wherever they need, and he'll definitely find the field as early as year 1. I do think his long-term position is edge rusher, but the versatility is very nice to have. The Cowboys then made 3 4th round picks, all of which were solid but nothing special. Drew Shelton is undersized and didn't have the best production, but moves really well, so I think there's some upside there. Devin Moore is the opposite, just a cornerback instead of O-line. He has great size and produce well, but lacks athleticism. And then LT Overton is a really interesting prospect actually, because he was really good in 2024, but his production dipped quite a bit in 2025. If he can get back to that 2024 form, I actually think he could be pretty solid in the NFL, and I like taking a flyer on that at the end of the 4th round. And then Anthony Smith had pretty good production, but it was at East Carolina, and it did have some very noticeable hands issues, so that was a fine pick in the 7th round. They did have one UDFA that stood out to me, tight end Michael Trigg. He put up nearly 700 yards in his final season at Baylor, moves pretty well, and has a ginormous catch radius. The problem is that he can't catch for shit. He had a near 13% drop rate in 2025, which just won't fly in the NFL. But if he can actually learn how to catch a football, I think there's something there with him. Overall, I give the Cowboys draft a B-. He had some amazing picks like Caleb Downs and Jason Barham, but the entire Malachi Lawrence process really drags down this grade. It'll be interesting to see how the whole thing plays out. Our final team in the NFC is the Philadelphia Eagles, and we're ending this conference on a great draft. They started by trading up with the Cowboys to take Mekhi Lemon, a process we just detailed. And while that sucks for the Cowboys, it's absolutely amazing for the Eagles. AJ Brown is on his way out, and Lemon was arguably the best receiver in this class. I say arguably because he and Carnell Tate are the 2 best receivers. They just have vastly different skill sets, so it's hard to compare the 2. I've said it before and I'll say it again, Lemon is the next great slot receiver in the NFL. I think he legitimately has a Amon-Ra St. Brown upside, and is going to be fantastic for the Eagles. The good picks don't stop there though, as I really like taking Eli Stowers in the back half of the 2nd round. Stowers isn't your typical tight end, he's undersized at just 239 pounds, but I think he's going to be a great F tight end in this offense with his 4.51 speed. He's going to be a huge mismatch for linebackers, and I think he and Dallas Goedert are going to form one of the better tight end duos in the NFL. They then had another great pick with Markel Bell at the top of the 3rd round. Bell is a fascinating prospect on account of the fact that he is a literal mountain of a human being, standing at 6'9", 346 pounds with 36-inch arms. And while he's not a great run blocker, he's actually a pretty good pass blocker, and I love that he landed in Philly, the same team that took a similarly sized Jordan Mailata and turned him into one of the best O-linemen in the league. Their next pick of Cole Payton is the only one in this draft that I wasn't a huge fan of. Payton was more of an early 7th round prospect for me, so getting him at the end of the 5th isn't a huge reach, but it's still a reach in my opinion. Payton dominated FCS competition, but at the end of the day, it is still FCS competition, and he did have some pretty bad mechanics. But one late 5th round pick isn't going to destroy this draft or anything. Micah Morris was their next pick at the end of the 6th round, and I really like this one as well. Morris isn't a great run blocker, and his technique isn't all the way there, but his pass blocking production was insane. He had less than a 1% pressure rate allowed in 2025, so I like getting someone like that in here to develop and work on other aspects of his game. He then had 3 7th round picks, all of which I like to varying degrees. Cole Wisniewski is a slower safety with great size and a pretty good run defender. I love the Eagles getting Uwer Bernard from the International Pathway program. This guy was quite literally built in a lab. His athletic testing is off the charts. The thing is, he never played a down of organized football before, but again, this is the team that turned Jordan Mailata into an all-pro player, and he also was a 7th round pick who came through the IPP as well, so I love taking another risk like that. I think Keyshawn James Newby actually had really good pass rush production at New Mexico, but he was going against very good competition, and he had a near 30% missed tackle rate, which is obviously abysmal. And as I did with the Vikings, I'm also factoring in the Jonathan Grenard trade because that happened during the draft, and I really like it for the Eagles. Giving up 2 3rd round picks isn't too bad, and he immediately becomes the best edge rusher on this team, so I thought it was a great process. The Eagles actually had 4 UDFAs that stood out to me. Joshua Rue is another international pathway player with some insane athleticism, so that's obviously intriguing. Daquan Wright is an athletic tight end prospect that had good production in his final year at Ole Miss, but is smaller and had a pretty awful contested catch rate. Deontay Lawson is an undersized linebacker that actually was really good against the run, though his coverage ability and tackling could use some work. And finally, Kapina Gushikin is an undersized but extremely fast safety that was fairly decent in coverage. Overall, I gave the Eagles draft an A+. Sure, the Cole Payton pick wasn't my favorite, but I think they got a ton of value with their other picks and made a really good trade. Howie, you did it again. We opened up the AFC with the AFC North and the Cleveland Browns. The Browns had 2 first-round picks this year, but I didn't think any of them were slam dunks. I originally gave the Spencer Fano pick a D in my first-round draft grades video, and while I don't hate it as much now, I am still not a big fan of the pick. I get it, Fano was a really high floor and probably will be the best tackle out of the top 4 in year 1, but he is the lowest upside out of those top 4 tackles, and I just thought Francis Mauigoa was a much better prospect, who went just 1 pick after this one. I think Fano will be good, but I think we're going to look back on this in a few years and realize Mauigoa should have been the first tackle off the board. And then I did think the Casey Conception pick was pretty good. He does have a pretty redundant skill set with Jerry Jeudy, but Jerry isn't going to be on this team forever, and I think Conception is a way better deep threat than Isaiah Bond, who they were using in that role last year. But part of the reason I'm fine with this pick is because of their second round selection of Denzel Boston. Frankly, I would have preferred them taking Boston at 24 and then Conception at 39, but hey, they got them both. Boston is a much better fit. He brings some desperately needed size into that wide receiver room, and I think he actually outproduces Conception, though both should be good. Boston was a first round guy for me, so getting him in the second round was awesome value, and the fit is great. The Browns also had another amazing second round pick though with Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. Warren I thought could have gone as early as the late first round, so getting him near the end of the second round is incredible value. He's very versatile, and I think he carves out a starting role for himself on day 1. And then their final day 2 pick was just okay. Austin Barber is a great run blocker, but he doesn't really hold up well in pass protection with shorter arms. At his depth, he's good, but I don't see a starter unless that pass blocking really develops. They then took 2 undersized athletic Alabama guys in the 5th round. Parker Brailsford was a pretty bad run blocker, just 289 pounds, but was actually decent in pass protection. And Justin Jefferson, no, not that Justin Jefferson, actually was a decent tackler and not bad in coverage, but being just 6 feet 223 pounds really hurt him in run defense. Joe Warrior was a solid pick at the end of the 5th round. He's a pretty bad blocker, but has excellent hands and moves pretty well, so I could see him being a solid fill-in if Harold Fannin goes down. They then selected Taylon Green at the very top of the 6th round to officially round out the weirdest quarterback room of all time. This was the absolute earliest I was willing to take Green, and if he actually learns how to throw a football, his elite athleticism may take him somewhere. And then Carson Ryan is a slower tight end that blocks pretty well, so that was a fine pick in the 7th round. They did have a couple UDFAs that stood out to me. Logan Fino has durability concerns, but actually had some decent pass rushing production, and then Michael Coates had some insane ball production, but is an undersized 25-year-old prospect. Overall, I gave the Browns draft a B. They absolutely nailed the second round, but everything else was between just fine to pretty good, and I do think they took the wrong tackle at pick 9, but they did probably get 4 starters with their advanced draft capital, and you can't be mad at that. The Bengals didn't have a first round pick after trading for Dexter Lawrence, which won't be factored into this draft grade because it wasn't during the draft, but I did think it was a really good trade for the Bengals. I also thought their selection of Cassius Howell in the second round was really good, more than really good actually. Howell was a sort of mini Ruben Bain in the sense that he's a great pass rusher that failed because of his shorter arms. While he's obviously not as good as Bain, I did really like him, and I think getting him at pick 41 is great value. But then Dakario Davis I wasn't as much of a fan of. Davis is a lengthy outside corner but doesn't move well. You're pretty much entirely betting on the fact that size will make up for his lack of movement ability. Also, I don't love taking an outside corner here when there were slot corners available, and that is a much bigger position of need. Dax Hill's been much better ever since moving to the outside, and if they put him back in the slot just so Davis can play, then that's a really bad evaluation of your talent. However, I did really like their next pick in Connor Liu. Liu fell because of a torn ACL in 2025, and he also has shorter arms, but the guy was really good in pass protection, and he's just 20 years old, so I think this was a great pick in the 4th round. But then we're back to picks I'm not fond of, because I thought Colby Young was a reach. The 6'5", 218-pound frame is nice, and he's actually decently fast for his size. But Young had very little production at Georgia, and also didn't have great hands, and the fact that he got just 3 contested catch looks in 2025 despite being 6'5" is very telling. The 4th round was just too early for me, even if it was the end of the 4th round. The next 3 picks I didn't really like though. Ryan Parker was a really solid pass blocker throughout his college career and actually took a big leap in run blocking in 2025, so I think there could be something there, though he is undersized, which is why he was available in the 6th round. And then Jack Andrews in the 7th round I thought was a phenomenal pick. He didn't have the most production at Texas, but his hands are nothing short of incredible. In his final 2 years, he had just 1 drop and a 70% contested catch rate. Plus, he actually tested fairly well. He does run a very crowded tight end room, but I really think there's something there with Andrews. You just don't find players with this level of reliability in the 7th round all that often, and I think just teams overlooked him due to the lack of production. And then Landon Robertson is a very undersized D tackler, just 6 feet 287 pounds, but is very explosive and actually had solid pass rushing production at Navy, so I thought that was a really good pick. They did have one UDFA that stood out to me, and that was Eric Gentry, and he really stands out. Gentry looks like a player someone will create in Madden to use her on defense. He's a 6'7" linebacker with 4.59 speed. He can't tackle and will get pushed back easily by offensive linemen that can get their hands under his pads, but this dude is just a fascinating player, and I think with the right coaching, there's a small chance he could become something special. Overall, I give the Bengals draft a B+. The Dakario Davis and Colby Young picks weren't great, but I think they really stole value in other areas, and for not having a first round pick, I think they did pretty well. The Ravens had 11 picks in this draft, and I thought most of them were pretty good. They stole Vega Ione at pick 14, and I thought he was the best interior lineman in this class. Guard was a massive need for the Ravens, and to be honest, I would have understood if the Titans or Giants had picked him way up in the top 5. So I think pick 14 is great value. I mean, the guy hasn't allowed a sack in 2 years and allowed just 4 pressures in all of 2025. I think he's going to be great. But their next pick was arguably even better. I think as only is edge a massive need for the Ravens, they need someone opposite Mike Green. But I think Young is a really good, well-rounded player. He had an 18% pressure rate in 2025, defends the run really well, and brings a nice power profile to the table. I think Young could have gone in the late first round, so getting him in the middle of the second is amazing value. However, I didn't like their third round pick at all. Jacoby Lane is a very polarizing prospect, and I just don't see all that much with him. I think he has upside. He's 6'4" with 4.47 speed and made some great catches. But the route running and consistency is nowhere near good enough to warrant a third round pick. He had a 7.5% drop rate and a 43.5% contested catch rate in 2025. Both not very good for someone who's supposed to be an X receiver, and he offers virtually nothing after the catch. To be honest, I think Elijah Surratt, who they got in the 4th round, is actually a much better player, and I think that was an absolute steal. Surratt way outproduced Lane in college and has a much better career drop and contested catch rate. He's not as physically gifted as Lane, but I think he's a much better football player, and if there's someone I'm betting on taking that X receiver role, it's Surratt over Lane every day. Matthew Hibner at the end of the 4th round was a little early for me. He's a 24-year-old prospect with only 2 real years of production, and even then he didn't produce all that much. He does have good hands though. Chandler Rivers in the 5th round was a really solid pick in my opinion. He was much better in 2024 than in 2025, but was still pretty good this year. He had really good ball production and moves really well, which is good considering he's undersized. Josh Cuevas was a fine pick. He was a similar level prospect to Matthew Hibner in my opinion, but this pick was 40 picks later, so it is much better value. Adam Randall I thought was a really fun pick. He's 6'3", 232 pounds, and still managed to run a 4.5 40-yard dash. The physical upside with him is fascinating, though he did only have 1 year of production, and pass protection is a massive issue. Ryan Eckley as a punter in the 6th round is fine. They did need a punter, and both of their 7th round picks were pretty good. Rayshon Benny is a bit undersized, but was actually pretty good in run defense. He's able to locate the ball carrier quickly and gap pretty well. Evan Bernstein was actually a really solid overall player, and even though he was at Northwestern, he actually played pretty well when facing tougher competition like Oregon and USC, and they didn't have any UDFAs that stood out to me. Overall, I give the Ravens draft an A-. Taking Jacoby Lane in the 3rd round was not a good pick, but 3 out of their top 4 picks were A+. I think the overall came away with some really good players. The Steelers had an incredibly interesting draft, taking a wide variety of players at some unusual positions. They started with Max Ionitor in the 1st round, and I think this pick makes a lot of sense. Ionitor was the best tackle available, and Broderick Jones needs some competition at that left tackle spot. Ionitor won't be the best right away, but he is an absolute freak. He's 6'6", 321 pounds, and runs a 4.9 140. I think he has a ton of upside, and if he hits, then I'm going to look dumb for not giving this an A. I do think there is a chance, though not high, that he never reaches that upside though, which is why I settled on a B, but it was still a good pick. Jeremy Bernard was also a good pick, though he was the opposite kind of player. He is a really high floor receiver with great hands, and I think he'll be able to do a lot of good stuff with this team. He isn't the best athlete, and his contested catch rate was low, especially in 2025, but I think he brings a lot to the table and was a really good pick in the middle of the 2nd round. However, just like the Ravens, the Steelers also made a bad 3rd round pick, and this one was worse than the Lane pick in my opinion, though I didn't really like either. This pick was similar to the Carson Beck pick, and while I think the Beck pick was worse, they were both graded Fs for a reason. I just don't see the need to take a quarterback in the 3rd round. Yes, this was before we knew Aaron Rodgers was returning, but I think it was pretty clear from the start that Rodgers will be back in Pittsburgh, and even if he wasn't and you wanted a big strong arm quarterback, you already have Will Howard, who I honestly thought was a better prospect. I thought Drew Aller was a 4th to 5th round guy, so this was also a pretty big reach. I would have rather them take someone who could potentially help this team now and focus on the QB development efforts on Howard, who I still believe in. So yeah, I really did not see it with this pick. Luckily, their other 3rd round picks were much better. Leland Everett, while not having the best coverage skills, has a great athleticism, size, and is an excellent run defender. He sets the edge well and had just an 8.8% missed tackle rate in 2025. Plus, he's got a ton of experience for only being 22 years old, have been starting 41 games for Georgia. Jennings Dunker at the very end of the 3rd round was an even better pick in my opinion. He is an absolute unit, especially in the run game, where he has been fantastic. He's super strong, tough, physical, and it's clear that he absolutely loves to just maul people. I think he could legitimately start day 1 as a very solid NFL run blocker, and he's not bad in pass protection either. Then on day 3, the Steelers took a bunch of players at unconventional positions. At first, first glance, Caden Whitehead looks like an awful pick. He had just 204 yards in 3 seasons at Iowa, but Whitehead's strength lies in his special teams ability, where he is an incredible punt returner. He had a ridiculous 26.8 yards per punt return and 3 punt return touchdowns. Now, I can only grade his special teamer so high, especially in the 4th round, but I do think Whitehead is good for a few explosive plays this season. Riley Nowakowski will play that fullback role Connor Hayward used to play. I trashed the Vikings for taking a similarly positioned player in Max Bredesen, but the reason I like this pick more is because Nowakowski is a better in every meaningful way and was drafted later. Gabriel Rubio is your typical large run defending D tackle you'd find on day 3, nothing too special there. Robert Spears-Jennings is a really fun player. He's actually a really good run defender and runs a 4.32 40-yard dash at 6'2", 205 pounds. Unfortunately, he's awful in coverage, which is why he was available in the 7th round. And then Eli Heidenreich played a sort of gadget role at Navy, where he both caught passes and carried the ball a good amount of times. I think he's a pretty fun player, and maybe the Steelers can find a good role for him. And there were any UDFAs that stood out to me. Overall, I give the Steelers a B-. Most of their picks were solid, and I like getting Jennings Tucker at the end of the 3rd round, but that Drew Rattler pick really lowers this grade for me. A pretty decent draft overall. The Raiders held the number 1 overall pick in this year's draft, and it was no surprise who they ended up taking. I think taking Mendoza number 1 overall is the right move. He was by far the best QB in this class, and it's time for the next era of Raiders football to begin. While Mendoza definitely isn't the best number 1 overall pick we've ever seen, I do think he has the potential to be a franchise quarterback. He's a proven winner. He won the national championship and Heisman Trophy in his final year, and he's got the size and arm to be an NFL quarterback. Bringing Kirk Cousins in was a wise move, and even if Mendoza doesn't start right away, I'm excited to see what he can do in his rookie year. However, I wish the Raiders did a better job to support him on day 2. They took Traden Stukes at the top of the 2nd round, and while I don't think Stukes is a bad player, there were others I would have rather seen the Raiders take. Denzel Boston would have been amazing with Mendoza, and I also would have liked Cassius Howell or Zion Young here better. But Stukes does have a lot of upside. He's 6'1" and runs a 4.33 40. He projects as a nickel corner in the NFL, and I think he could be really good at it. But he's also nearly 25 years old and did suffer a torn ACL in 2024, so there are legitimate concerns, and I wouldn't have taken him this high, especially with the other names still on the board. Huron Crawford was a bit of a better pick, but nothing special. He had really good pass rushing production, but he's not very athletic and is an absolutely abysmal tackler. He missed nearly a quarter of his tackles in 2025, and that's just not something that will fly in the NFL. If the Raiders really wanted to attack nickel corner and edge rusher, I would have rather seen them take Zion Young at pick 38 and then Keontae Scott at pick 67. So yeah, not the best day 2 process in my opinion. However, I did really like their day 3, starting with Jermon McCoy, which is an absolute steal. There's a lot of uncertainty with how much he'll be able to play in his rookie season, and the injury concerns on him are real. But McCoy is so good that I am shocked no one took a chance on him in the 3rd round. To get a literal top 20 talent at pick 101 is incredible value. Mike Washington was also a great pick. He is a rare blend of size and speed. He's 6'1", 223 pounds and runs a 4.33 40-yard dash. He actually scored a perfect 10 out of 10 on the RAS scale, and he had good rushing production as well. He does have 2 main flaws. His ball security isn't great, 7 fumbles in the last 2 years, and he's awful in pass protection. However, I do think he can be a great backup to Ashton Genty and take a little bit of the workload off of him. Dalton Johnson is an undersized safety that isn't the best tackler, but he's extremely quick and had a breakout season in 2025, showing some really good coverage shape, so I thought this was a great pick in the 5th round. Hezekiah Massis is another undersized player, and he doesn't have the athletic traits Johnson has, but has shown really good ball production throughout his time in college. However, the biggest knock on him is definitely the penalties. He had 14 in his final 2 years, but I did think this was a pretty good pick. Malik Benson was another good pick. He's very fast and has really good hands, but is smaller and not great after the catch. And then Brandon Cleveland is a decent run defending D tackle that was a fine pick in the 7th round, and they didn't have any UDFAs that stood out to me. Overall, I give the Raiders draft a B+. I think they absolutely nailed day 3, getting a ton of value, and they also got a potential franchise quarterback, but I didn't really like their day 2 process, which is what held this back from being in the A's. It's weird talking about the Chiefs with a top 10 pick, but here we are, and I like what they did overall. Considering McCoy's injury, Mansour Delane was definitely the best and safest corner in this class, and the Chiefs do need secondary help. The only reason this grade is an A- and not an A is because I don't think the Chiefs necessarily needed to trade up for Delane, but it's good that they got their guy. They then had a second first-round pick from the Trent McDuffie trade, and they used that on Peter Woods, and I also like this pick. He had a really weird drop-off in production in 2025 from 2024 where he was really good, but I do think he still showed a lot of strengths, most notably a really good first step. He is going to have to prove that 2025 wasn't a fluke, but I do like the swing at upside. They then took R. Mason Thomas at the top of the second round, and I have a lot of mixed feelings about this pick. On one hand, I think Thomas has the potential to be a really good pass rusher in the NFL, and the Chiefs desperately need pass rushing help off the edge. But on the other hand, I think Cassius Howell and Zion Young were both better prospects, and both of those guys were on the board, so I don't think the Chiefs took the right player. But that doesn't mean I hate this pick, and I still think Thomas can be good. Jadon Kennedy was a good pick in the 4th round. He's undersized and not the most athletic, but he had a really good season in coverage in 2025, allowing just a 39.4 passer rating when targeted, which is really good. Plus, he lowered his penalty numbers from 8 in 2024 down to just 2 in 2025, and he also improved his missed tackle rate and reception allow percentage as well. Then, Emmett Johnson in the 5th round was an absolute steal. I really like Johnson. He doesn't have the most insane traits, but he is a really good football player. His vision is fantastic, he has good contact balance, and in the receiving game, he showed really good hands. Kenneth Walker isn't exactly the most durable guy, but I think Johnson can step right in and take some of the workload. Then Cyrus Allen at the end of the 5th round was a pretty solid pick. He's got good hands and actually had really good touchdown production, scoring 12 in his final year. However, he is undersized with not a ton of speed and did have a really low contested catch rate in 2025. And then Garrett Nussmeier at the very end of the draft was one of the best picks of the weekend. Nussmeier was a guy I thought could have gone as high as the 4th round or maybe even the late 3rd. Patrick Mahomes may not be ready to start the season, and I'm not saying throw Nussmeier out there day 1, but it's not like Justin Fields is any good. Plus, I think Nussmeier could be a really solid backup for a while, and this was great value. They did have a couple UDFAs that stood out to me. Xavier Wonkpa is a really solid run defending safety that actually had some good athletic traits as well, but the UDFA that really stood out to me was Jeff Caldwell. Caldwell is an athletic freak of nature. He's 6'5", 216 pounds, around a 4.3 140-yard dash. You can't find that combination of size and speed just anywhere. As an actual prospect, Caldwell really wasn't that great. He struggled with jobs and had a weirdly low contested catch rate given his size, but I was shocked that no team took a flyer on him in the later rounds, and I think picking someone up with his traits as a UDFA was great, and the main reason why this is a B grade. Overall, I gave the Chiefs draft an A. There weren't any picks I was overly critical of, and I think they got a lot of value, especially on day 3. Heads up everyone, the Chiefs might be back. The Chargers began their draft by selecting one of my favorite players in this class, Akeem Mesidor. He fell to pick 22 because he is 25 years old, and that is really old for a 1st round pick, but he is the most pro-ready edge rusher in this class outside of maybe his teammate Ruben Bain. Mesidor was genuinely amazing at Miami, and a player like him is perfect for a team like the Chargers that are in win now mode. You don't have to wait for a 21 or 22-year-old to develop, because Mesidor at 25 is what you hope many 22-year-olds become by the time they're 25. I genuinely think Mesidor is a dark horse defensive rookie of the year candidate, and while I can't justify an A+ because of the age, I absolutely love this pick for the Chargers. They then took Jake Slaughter at the very end of the 2nd round, and I don't hate this pick, but I do think there were better interior linemen available. Emmanuel Pregnon and Jennings Dunker were both better prospects in my opinion, but Slaughter did have really good pass blocking production, so I think this was a pretty solid pick. I do really like taking Brennan Thompson in the 4th round. He's undersized at just 5'9", 164 pounds, but he is legit 4.26 speed. That isn't something you could find very often, and with Justin Herbert's arm, I wouldn't be surprised if Thompson has a few 100-yard games in just his rookie year. The other 2 4th round picks I thought were both decent selections. Travis Burke is a massive 6'9" tackle that was actually solid as a run blocker, but has some room for improvement as a pass blocker and didn't exactly play against the best competition at Memphis. And then Genesis Smith has some solid traits at safety and was pretty good in coverage, but was a bad run defender and an even worse tackler. Nick Barrow I liked at the top of the 5th round. He offers virtually nothing as a pass rusher, but was actually a really solid run defender in college, so I think he could carve out a role for himself on early downs. They then took 2 guards in the 6th round, which were both fine picks. Logan Taylor is a large straight C tackle that really struggled in pass protection, and Alex Harkey is a bit more well-rounded, but did commit a lot of penalties and wasn't exactly great in pass protection either. They did have one UDFA that stood out to me, and Nnamdi Tucker. Tucker is an undersized edge rusher that dominated as a pass rusher against low-level competition at Western Michigan, but he is a great first step that can definitely translate into the NFL. Overall, I give the Chargers a B. I really didn't hate any of their picks, and I think they made a few great selections with Akeem Mesidor and Brendan Thompson, though most of their picks were in that solid to good range. I think overall they had a pretty good draft. The Broncos didn't pick until the 3rd round after the Jalen Waddle trade, and I think they did okay with their picks. They started with Tyler Onadium at the top of the 3rd round, who's an undersized D tackle that is decent but not amazing athletic traits and also doesn't bring much as a pass rusher. He is much better in run defense, and his length really helps him land first contact, plus he is a really solid tackler. But I do feel like there were better D tackles on the board, and this was overall just a fine pick. They then took Jonah Coleman in the 4th round. Coleman got a lot of hype, but I think here was the right spot for him. He's a shorter, well-built running back who had a ton of of touchdown production in college. Ball security is also his strength, just 2 fumbles on 551 carries throughout his college career. However, he doesn't have the top end speed to create big plays and is coming off a knee injury he dealt with in 2025. Plus, Emmett Johnson was still on the board, who I thought was a much better prospect, and even Mike Washington was better in my opinion too. But I totally understand taking a running back here though, and I think he could be a solid early down presence. Paige Casey was another fine pick. He was a good pass protector at Boise State with a good anchor and strong hands, but it was at Boise State, so the competition level wasn't high, and he doesn't really have the athleticism or strength to be a mover in the run game. Justin Jolly in the 5th round was a good pick. He's undersized and not very fast, but he has excellent hands, had a good contested catch rate, and can attack all 3 levels of the field. The Broncos then had 3 7th round picks at the very end of the draft. Miles Scott is an undersized slower safety that was actually a pretty good run defender and a decent ball production. Dallin Bentley was their best pick in terms of value. I thought he was a slightly better prospect than Justin Jolly, so to get him over 100 picks later is great. He's quick, even has better hands than Jolly, and literally 0 drops in 2025, and has better production overall. The only real knock on Bentley is the really low contested catch rate, but with the second to last pick in the 7th round, I think the value is definitely there. And with the Mr. Irrelevant pick, they took Red Murdoch, who is another undersized, slower player that was actually really good in run defense. But he did play at Buffalo where the competition wasn't great, and there were any UDFAs that stood out to me. Overall, I give the Broncos draft a C+, and that's not because they didn't have any picks in the 1st or 2nd round, but I don't think they really found a ton of value outside of Dallin Bentley. It was a decent draft considering the circumstances, but nothing special. We begin the AFC South with the Tennessee Titans, who began their draft by getting Cam Ward a shiny new weapon in Cardinal Tate. Tate is the best X receiver in this class, a skill set that the Titans very much need, and I like how he fits into this offense. He's got fantastic hands and is going to be a super reliable target for Ward. My only criticism of this pick is that I would have liked to see Vega Ione or Francis Mauigoa here, because pass protection was a huge issue last year, but I still think this was a good pick. Kendrick Falk, on the other hand, was not as good of a pick, especially considering that they traded up for him. First of all, there were much better prospects on the board like Cassius Howell and Zion Young, but I don't think Falk is a first-round caliber prospect. He's a great run defender, but he couldn't even crack a 10% pressure rate in college. Unless he's going to put on weight and fully convert to D-tackle, I don't like taking a guy who's not good at rushing the passer in the 1st round. But he will provide high-level run defense play, which is something. Anthony Hill in the 2nd round was a great pick in my opinion. He's a super quick and aggressive linebacker, which sometimes is a detriment, but other times it works in his favor. He wasn't asked to do too much of the traditional linebacker stuff, especially in run defense, but I think with the right coaching, he could become a legitimately elite run defender. He's already a great tackler. He lowered his missed tackle rate down to just 4.5% in 2025, and his movement ability will serve him well. He's also not bad in coverage. I think he showed good zone instincts. Frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if he's out there starting instead of Cody Barton, who was really bad last year. We then go all the way to the 5th round for the Titans' next pick, Fernando Carmona, who's kind of solid at everything. Solid size, moved decently well, and wasn't horrible in either the pass game or the run game. But unless things really click, I don't see him being anything more than a backup. Nicholas Singleton was also an okay pick. He had a really good 2024 season before getting his job taken by Katron Allen, so it was interesting that Singleton was actually the first of the 2 off the board. He does have solid size and speed, so maybe he can become something, but honestly, I would have just taken the guy that won the job at Penn State. And then Jackie Marshall in the 6th round was not a pick I was a fan of. I rarely give 6th or 7th round picks anything lower than a C because they are just so late, but I didn't even think Marshall was a priority UDFA, let alone a draftable prospect. He's undersized and can't hold up in run defense. He's a terrible tackler, and he brings nothing as a pass rusher. The only positive is the 4.88 40-yard dash. That's it. It's a 6th round pick, so I can't hate it too much, but it was still a waste of a draft pick in my opinion. Pat Coogan 8 picks later was a much better selection. He's got good size and actually held up pretty well in pass protection, showing a solid anchor and good hand usage. And then Jaron Kanak isn't going to receive the highest grade, but I actually love that he landed here with Tennessee. I see a lot of Chigo Konko and Kanak. They tested almost identically and both fit that F tight end role with little to no blocking ability. I think there is some potential with this pick. And then the Titans actually had 3 UDFAs that stood out to me. Emil Wagner was actually a really solid pass protector at Notre Dame. He just doesn't have the size or strength to be a good run blocker. Latrell McCutcheon has a good combination of size, speed, and length for the position, and while he somehow didn't record a single interception in college, he did have 8 pass breakups in his final year, which is really good. And then the one that stood out to me the most was Bishop Fitzgerald. He's undersized and didn't really test well at all, but he's just a really good football player. He tackles well with solid run defense and showed really good coverage instincts, highlighted by his 10 interceptions and 12 pass breakups in just 3 years. Frankly, I would be shocked if he doesn't make the team. Overall, I gave the Titans draft a B-. I didn't love trading up for Keldrick Falk, and there were a few mediocre to questionable picks on day 3, but overall, I think the Titans did a decent job. The Colts didn't have a first-round pick due to the Sauce Gardner trade last season, but I think they overall did a really good job with their draft picks. They started with CJ Allen in the 2nd round, and Allen is a really fun player. He's a really solid athlete and when at Georgia was an incredible run defender. Not only was his tackling very good throughout his 3 years in college, but he diagnoses plays well, and when he does, he flies downhill and fills gaps extremely quickly. I think he starts day one as a really high floor run defender with the potential to grow even more. He does have more limitations in coverage. He can get caught flat-footed in play action and did struggle more in man coverage, but I still think Allen is a really good player, and if his run defense continues to develop and his coverage becomes half as good as his run defense, he's going to be a great player in the NFL. I also really like taking AJ Halsey in the 3rd round. Similar to Allen, Halsey is an overall really good player that does struggle in one area of his game. For Halsey, that's his tackling. His shorter arms and inconsistent technique led to him missing almost 60% of his tackles in 2025, but pretty much everything else is positive. He's a very solid run defender and absolutely shines in coverage, with really good zone instincts and consistently great ball production. He had 8 interceptions and 10 pass breakups over his final 2 years, and last year allowed just a 59.0 passer rating when targeted. I think both Halsey and Allen had a lot of potential, and when you don't have a first-round pick, you really want to nail your day 2 picks, which I think the Colts did here. But the good doesn't stop as they took Jalen Farmer in the 4th round, and I think this was another fun pick. Farmer has a lot of work to do when it comes to fundamentals. He's over-aggressive at times, and his timing off his snap is inconsistent, which led to him not having the best production when it came to blocking. However, there is still a ton to like about him. He moves extremely well, has massive arms, and is ridiculously strong. The upside with him is real, and he showed a lot of development from his first year at Kentucky to his second, and I think there's even more in there. Bryce Bowditcher at the end of the 4th round was another good pick. He's a bit smaller, doesn't move super well, and there weren't any aspects of his game that necessarily stood out, but he was very solid at everything, and I think he's someone who can fill in and play solid as early as his rookie season if someone goes down. They then took George Gums in the 5th round, and this was the only pick the Colts made that I didn't actively like. Not that it was bad or anything. Gums actually has some nice athletic traits, especially when it comes to vertical explosiveness, but he just wasn't a very good pass rusher, not even cracking a 10% pressure rate, which isn't good for an edge rusher. Frankly, I thought Caden Curry was a better prospect, and they got him at the end of the 6th round. He didn't test well and has shorter arms, but was really productive as a pass rusher at Ohio State, and wasn't bad in run defense either. His first step is going to catch linemen off guard, and he plays every snap like it's his last. Then Seth McGowan in the 7th round was a pretty solid pick. He's got good size and speed, but ball security is a concern. 5 fumbles over the past 2 seasons on 320 carries, and he doesn't have anywhere close to the receiving ability or pass protection ability to be a 3-down back. And then finally, they took Deion Burks at the very end of the draft, and I think this was a great pick. Burks didn't have the best production at Oklahoma and is undersized for the position, but he does have legit 4.3 speed, has good hands, and actually has a shockingly high contested catch rate for how small he is. I'm never going to be bad at taking a shot at a true deep threat with elite speed at the literal end of the draft. And there were any UDFAs that stood out to me. Overall, I gave the Colts draft an A. For not having a first-round pick, I think the Colts got a lot of value and a lot of players with upside. This was a great draft. The Texans needed to get CJ Stroud some more help after the disaster that was the divisional round game against the Patriots, so it makes sense that they traded up to get their guy. I like Keelan Rutledge. He's an athletic freak and an absolute mauler in the run game. I think getting someone who was strong and aggressive makes sense for a Texans O-line that has been straight up bullied the past couple years. I do think Emmanuel Pregnon and Jennings Dunker were better prospects, so I can't grade this pick too high, but it's far from the worst we've seen. I really like getting Caden McDonald at the top of the 2nd round. This is the best true nose tackle in this class, and he's going to provide some beef to an already elite Texans D-line. He's a fantastic run defender who is impossible to move, with a ridiculous anchor and consistent tackling production. Just 2 missed tackles the entirety of 2025. Now, he doesn't bring much as a pass rusher outside of a bull rush, but pass rush is the last thing the Texans need. McDonald is just going to sit there and completely clog up the middle of that D-line, and I think he's going to be really good with DeMeco Ryans. However, their next pick of Marlon Klein was one of the worst picks in this entire draft. The only good thing about him is his testing numbers. Being 6'6" with 4.61 speed is a rare combination, but this guy just sucks at football. He's a 24-year-old prospect who had 364 yards and 1 touchdown in 4 years at Michigan. Plus, he has really bad hands, an 11% drop rate, and a 40% contested catch rate, and he's not even that good of a blocker. Considering this tight end room already features Dalton Schultz and Foster Moreau, there was no reason to spend a 2nd-round pick on someone who was in all likelihood going to be your tight end 3. Your next pick in Fabici Waiwu was much better. Waiwu was a genuinely great pass protector. He allowed just 2 pressures and 0 sacks in 2025. In fact, he had the 2nd highest pass blocking efficiency out of all offensive linemen this year, and the only person ahead of him played half as many pass blocking snaps. Problem is, Waiwu is a really bad run blocker. He doesn't move well and isn't able to win one-on-one. If things are going really bad and you need pass protection so CJ Stroud doesn't die, then you can put Waiwu out there day 1 and he'll provide that for you. But he has to improve in the run game or he'll never be a true starter in this league. They then took Wade Woodaz in the 4th round, and this was a fine pick. He's a good athlete and isn't an active liability in any particular aspect, but he doesn't really stand out in any way either. I think he could be an okay backup. Kamari Ramsey was a good pick in the 5th round. In 2024, he was much better in coverage as a true free safety, but in 2025 was forced to play more nickel corner and he wasn't as good. But in 2025, he did lower his missed tackle rate down to just 3.2%, and if he can combine his 2024 coverage with his 2025 tackling, I actually think he could be pretty solid. He does lag behind in the run game though, which is why he was available at the top of the 5th round. Lewis Bond was another good pick. He's slow and undersized, but did show really solid hands and had good receiving production, even if it was at Boston College. And then Aiden Fisher is a decent run defending linebacker, but doesn't have the athleticism or movement skills to be a good coverage player. There was one UDFA that stood out to me in Noah Whittington. He doesn't offer much in the receiving game, and he will turn 25 years old during the season, but he's got legit 4.4 speed and showcased really good ball security. Just one fumble during his 4 years at Oregon. Overall, I give the Texans draft a C. I liked a decent amount of their picks, but Keelan Rutledge in the 1st round wasn't the best, and I think they quite literally lit the 59th overall pick on fire. I liked a decent amount of their picks, but Keelan Rutledge in the 1st round wasn't the best, and I think they quite literally lit the 59th pick in their draft on fire, so that's really going to lower this grade, but at least McDonald should be really good for them. The Jaguars didn't have a 1st round pick this year due to them trading up for Travis Hunter last year, and unlike the Colts, who also didn't have a 1st round pick, the Jags did not make up for that, as they did not have a good draft outside of one pick that we'll get to. But we'll start with Nate Borkercher, one of the worst picks in this entire draft. The Texans were the only AFC South team to massively reach on a tight end in the 2nd round. Borkercher never crossed 200 yards a season in college. His best was in 2025 where he had 198. He blocks somewhat well, but he's not even close to the best blocking tight end in this class, and you just don't take blocking tight ends in the 2nd round unless they're really good. And even then, you should probably wait until the 3rd round at best. There were so many good players available, so to take someone like this with your 1st pick is a horrible process. Not to mention that I don't even think Borkercher was the best tight end the Jaguars drafted, but we'll get to that later when I talk about Tanner Koziol. First, we have to talk about another bad pick in Albert Regis. Regis is a semi-decent run-defending D-tackle that offers virtually nothing as a pass rusher. He's extremely short arms for the position, and honestly, if you wanted a run-defending D-tackle, Dominique Orange was right there, and I thought he was a much better prospect. The one saving grace of this draft is Emmanuel Pregnon, who is an incredible value in the 3rd round. Pregnon may be a 25-year-old prospect, but he's also the 2nd best guard in this draft who checks virtually every box. He's got length, explosiveness, speed, and is super well-rounded. Both his pass protection and run blocking are really good, and I think he can legitimately start day 1 if needed, and if it wasn't for this pick, this draft would have looked so much worse. Jalen Husky with the last pick in the 3rd round was decent. He's a solid tackler and had really good ball production, but he's undersized and doesn't have the athletic ability to be a starter in my opinion, unless he's able to really develop his game. Wesley Williams in the 4th round was not a good pick. He's a decent run defender, but is extremely low for an edge rusher. Doesn't offer much as a pass rusher, and is a horrible tackler. Outside of some early down work, you aren't getting anything from this guy. Tanner Koziol was the only other pick that I actually have more positive things to say about. He brings absolutely nothing as a blocker, but is a really fun player in the receiving game. He's 6'6" and runs a 4.7 40-yard dash, and he showcased some really good hands in college as well. Like I mentioned earlier, I think Tanner Koziol is the better of the 2 tight ends the Jaguars drafted, because Koziol is a much better receiver than Borkercher is a blocker. And while Borkercher is going to play because the Jags need someone who can block, I think long-term Koziol is the one that remains. Both Josh Cameron and CJ Williams are like the exact same player. They're both well-built wide receivers with good hands, but are way too slow to be starters in the NFL. I did think Cameron was a bit of a better prospect, so that's why he gets a C+, while Williams gets a C. Zach Durfee is a pretty good pass rusher that moves well, but doesn't offer much in run defense, and a third of his pass rushing production came in one game against Washington State, and there was a clear drop-off when he played better competition. And then Parker Hughes is a really athletic linebacker slash box safety with legit 4.4 speed, but wasn't exactly amazing at college and did play at Middle Tennessee, so the competition spike is going to be real for him. And there weren't any UDFAs that stood out to me. Overall, I give the Jaguars draft a D+. Emmanuel Pregnon, like I said, is the saving grace of this draft. If he's good, then at least the Jaguars came away with something. But they hated their first 2 picks, and nothing else outside of Tanner Koziol was anything to write home about. Despite the A+ pick of Pregnon, this was not a good draft. Final division is the AFC East, and we'll start with the New York Jets, who opened up their draft by shocking everybody, taking David Bailey 2nd overall over Arvo Reese and Ruben Bain. And I'll be honest, I don't like this pick. Bailey is a really good pass rusher, but he did play against quite a few lower level schools, and he also doesn't have a fully developed pass rush set. I just think Reese and Bain were much better prospects, and I was more comfortable with Bailey in the 12 to 20 range, not at pick 2. I think he can be good, really good even, but I think Reese and Bain will be better. The Jets then took Kenyon Sadiq with their next first round pick, pick, and this one I liked a lot more. Sadiq was by far the best tight end in this class, and I think he and Mason Taylor are going to do some really fun 12 personnel stuff. Given the lack of wide receiver talent on this team, I think it makes a lot of sense for the Jets to transition to a more 12 personnel team. So getting another really good tight end in Sadiq into that room was a great process. And the fact that they got Omar Cooper Jr. at the end of the first round makes the Sadiq pick even better. Like I said, the Jets have a real lack of wide receiver talent. It's basically Garrett Wilson, Omar Cooper, and nobody else. But Cooper at pick 30 is a great value. He's a total do-it-all receiver, and he's going to be a super reliable and explosive weapon for Geno Smith. I can totally get behind having Garrett Wilson, Omar Cooper, Kenan Sadiq, and Mason Taylor as your primary weapons. So I think the Jets did a great job giving Geno Smith more options to throw to. I also really like taking D'Angelo Pons in the middle of the second round. I am really high on Pons. I genuinely think he could have been a mid to late first round pick. I know there are some that are going to question his size, and that's fair. He's only 5'9", 182 pounds. But unlike many other corners, he doesn't let that size affect his play. Not only does he have true 4.36 speed, giving him the ability to hang with virtually any receiver, but he's also super explosive. His 43.5-inch vertical is among the best we've ever seen at the corner position, and he uses that to his advantage. He had 5 interceptions and 16 pass pickups over his final 2 years at Indiana, and he's consistently been at all around a 50% reception rate allowed. Not to mention he had just 2 missed tackles in 2025, giving him a 3% missed tackle rate, which is elite for any corner, let alone one of his size. Oh, and did I mention he's only 21 years old? Pons may be 5'9", 182, but he plays like he's 6'2", 215. Just go watch Pons against 6'4" Denzel Boston and tell me how he's too small for the NFL. Pons is an absolute stud, and I think this was a fantastic pick. Dale Jackson at the top of the 4th round was another great pick. His pass rushing efficiency dropped off in 2025, but he did show some good stuff in 2024, and the run defense is where his true strengths are. Jackson is prototypical size for the position, and his 86.5-inch wingspan is truly incredible. He's got a good anchor and also really dropped his missed tackle right down in 2025, which was good to see. Jackson is behind 2 good run defending D tackles in Devondre Sweat and Harrison Phillips, and I think he finds himself on the field at least a few times per game. But Cade Klubnik 7 picks later wasn't my favorite pick. I had Klubnik more of a 5th round guy, and while I don't hate taking a quarterback, Garrett Nussmeier was right there, and I thought he was a better prospect than Klubnik. His sharp decline in 2025 from 2024 just worries me, and he also spares those more often than I would like. I thought Annis Cooper in the 6th round was a good pick. He's got good size and length and was solid in pass protection, but doesn't move well and wasn't very good in the run game. BJ Payne in the 7th round was also a good pick. He's another lengthy player with size and speed, and while he doesn't stand out in a particular area, he was solid all around, and I think he'd be a nice backup with upside for this team. And there were any UDFAs that stood out to me. Overall, I gave the Jets a B+. I can't in good faith put this draft in the A's because I did not like taking Bailey 2nd overall, and I think they are going to regret not taking Arvo Reese or Ruben Bain. Pretty much everything else outside of the Klubnik pick was really good, and I think this team found a lot of future starters and contributors in this draft. The Dolphins made by far the most picks out of any team in this draft, with 13, so there is a lot to talk about. They didn't start off on the best note, as taking Keenan Proctor 12th overall wasn't my favorite use of a first round pick. Proctor's positional flexibility is good for a Dolphins team that hasn't really figured out their true starting 5 yet, but I did think Vega Ione was a better guard, and both Monroe Freeling and Blake Miller were better tackles, so they didn't get the best player at either position. Plus, this team did pass on Ruben Bain, Mekhi Lemon, and Caleb Downs, and considering they desperately need help at all 3 of those positions and those 3 were better prospects, I would like to see the Dolphins take one of them. I think Proctor is upset and will be good for them, but I feel like there were better uses of the 12th overall pick. I did like taking Chris Johnson with their 2nd first round pick, the one they got from the Jalen Waddle trade. He's a super good fit in this new Jeff Hafley system, as he's great in zone coverage and has the athleticism to cover the entirety of the field. He is probably going to be asked to be this team's CB1 because their secondary is so bad, which is not going to be an easy job, but I do think he has a lot of potential, and I thought this was a great pick. I also really like getting Jacob Rodriguez in the 2nd round. He's a bit undersized and did miss his fair share of tackles, but he's also one of the best run defending linebackers in this class. He diagnoses plays quickly and flies to the football. His 7 forced fumbles and 4 interceptions in his final year are a testament to his playmaking ability, and I think that if he can clean up some of the tackling deficiencies, he can be a really good linebacker in this league. However, the next pick of Caleb Douglas I really did not understand. The 6'4", 4.39 speed combination is intriguing, but the positives really stop there. His hands are a real concern for someone who's supposed to be an ex-receiver. He had an 11.5% drop rate in 2025, and he also caught just 35% of his with contested catches. He doesn't have the vertical explosiveness to win jump balls, and to be honest, I just don't see him ever becoming a legitimate NFL starter. There were so many receivers on the board that they could have taken here, and I think that despite being the first one they took, Douglas is the worst out of the 3 receivers in this Dolphins draft class. They got back on track with Will Kasmerick later in the 3rd round. Remember how I said I don't like taking blocking tight ends until at least the 3rd round and only if they're really good? Well, Will Kasmerick is really freaking good. He's a slightly larger and more athletic version of Jackson Hawes, though I think Hawes was a slightly better blocker, but any Bills fan will tell you how good Jackson Hawes was last year, and I think this pick makes a lot of sense for the Dolphins. Greg Dulcich, their current tight end, doesn't really bring anything to the table in terms of run blocking, so Kasmerick can fill that role while Dulcich does the receiving stuff. Not to mention Kasmerick can be a reliable target underneath. He hasn't dropped a pass in 2 years. I think this was an underratedly good pick, and he's going to play a lot for this team. They then took Chris Bell 7 picks later, and I really like Chris Bell. The reason he was available at the end of the 3rd round was because he tore his ACL in November of 2025 and might not even play his rookie season. But when he does come back, this guy is a true 2nd round talent who I think could be a really good receiver. He's 6'2", 222 pounds, great size for the position, and he also runs a 4.4 440. Unlike Caleb Douglas, Bell is an X receiver that can actually win on the outside and doesn't drop a million passes. I think the Dolphins are going to be very patient and careful with Bell, but I'm really excited for when he comes back. They then opened up day 3 with Trey Moore, who played a hybrid edge/linebacker role at Texas and was pretty solid. He's quick, explosive, and showed some good stuff as a pass rusher. I think he transitions fully to edge rusher in the NFL because the coverage just isn't good and he's not a good tackler, but I think in the 4th round this was a pretty solid pick. And then we get a run of 3 straight A+ absolute slam dunk picks. I love each of these guys and I want to make sure I give all of them their fair time. Starting with Kyle Lewis, who I think teams overlook because of the fact that he's horribly undersized, just 6 feet 220 pounds, but this guy is explosive, instinctive, and I think can be a really good coverage linebacker in the NFL. Lewis has some of the best movement skills in this entire class. He's able to flip his hips and fluidly transition instantly, helping him a lot in man coverage. He also had consistently good ball production, 6 interceptions and 5 pass breakups over his final 2 seasons. I actually think he can do a lot of fun stuff as a hybrid weak side linebacker/nickel corner. He's got the speed to keep up with tight ends and some slot receivers, and I think he's going to be out there early on passing downs. The run defense isn't as good, but he does tackle well, so I don't think he'll be a liability out there. I thought Lewis was a really fun prospect, and I'm excited to see what Jeff Hafley can do with them. Then we get to Michael Taft, who is one of the best coverage safeties in this class. His instincts and anticipation are really good, and an underrated aspect of his game was his communication ability. Taft missed 2 games in 2025, and in those 2 games, Texas's pass defense really struggled, giving up 382 yards to Mississippi State and 365 to Vanderbilt. It's not a coincidence that the 2 games Taft didn't play were the 2 games Texas let up the most passing yards and had coverage breakdowns that just didn't happen when Taft was on the field. He's also a sound tackler and only committed 1 penalty in his final year. Considering how bad this safety room is currently, I would almost guarantee that Taft finds himself on the field at some point during his rookie season, and I think he could surprise some people. And then the final pick in this A+ run was Kevin Coleman, who, with Chris Bell likely not playing much, if at all, in his rookie year, I think will be the best rookie receiver on this team. The size and testing numbers weren't ideal. He's just 5'10", 179, and ran a 4.49 40, which isn't bad, but not great considering his size. But that didn't stop Coleman from being a really good receiver at Miami. His hands absolutely stand out, and I think he can really produce for this team in year 1. The Dolphins' final 3 picks were all solid, some of them having 1 or 2 things to like about them that bumped this grade up to a C+. Today, Traore is an undersized tight end that moves well and has good hands, but the production at Mississippi State was never anything special, and he's not a great run blocker. DJ Campbell is a lengthy guard that has some speed to him, and it wasn't horrible in any particular aspect, but did have a serious penalty problem, and doesn't have quite have the upside to be anything more than a backup. And then Max Llewellyn is a really interesting prospect, actually. He's got an elite first step and showed some really good stuff as a pass rusher, but he's a bad run defender, he's slower, and is legitimately one of the worst tacklers I've ever seen. I'm sorry, but you aren't starting in the NFL if you're missing nearly 35% of your tackles. But there's a tiny bit of upside in there, so it was a fine pick in the 7th round. The Dolphins actually had 3 UDFAs that stood out to me. Mason Reeder is sort of similar to Max Llewellyn in the sense he's a larger edge rusher with good pass rushing production who can't tackle, but I do think Reeder is a better run defender and has more athletic tools than Llewellyn did. Lewis Moore had a breakout 2025 season after transferring back to Indiana after a rough stint in Ole Miss, and I thought he definitely was draftable in the later rounds. His testing numbers are awful, he's small and slow for the position, but did have 6 interceptions and 5 pass breakups in 2025, and I thought he wasn't a horrible coverage safety. And then Renee Conga is an athletic pass rushing D tackle that actually was a decent tackler and can fill in on 3rd down if needed. Overall, I give the Dolphins draft an A-. With there being 13 picks, there was going to be some bad, and unfortunately that bad came in the form of 2 of their top 4 picks, especially the Caleb Douglas pick. But I think there was a lot more good than bad, and they absolutely stole value on day 3. The Dolphins, for the most part, made the most out of the insane amount of draft capital they had, and I think if some of these players hit their upside, we could be looking back on this draft as a turning point for Miami. The Bills opened up their draft by trading down twice, taking them out of the first round before they selected TJ Parker with their first pick. And while I think Parker is a pretty good player, I do think the Bills passed up on some better options. Cassius Howell, Derek Moore, and Zion Young were all better prospects in my opinion. Parker is good size and speed for the edge position, and he's both a really solid pass rusher and run defender. He used his hands well and did force 6 fumbles in 2024, so that playmaking ability is definitely in there. And honestly, there really aren't any massive holes in his game, but there's nothing elite about him either that makes me excited for him like I should be with someone picked 35th overall. He's going to be a decent player for Buffalo, but I feel like they could have done better. Then went with Davis and Igbinosun in the 3rd round, and I thought this was a decent pick. The run defense was really good. Igbinosun sets the edge well and is a pretty solid tackler, though not the best. He also has good size and length, and I think he'd be a solid outside corner. His main problem is definitely penalties. He had 16 in 2024 and did get that down to 5 last year, but that's still not great, and I'd expect some frustrating moments from him. He also doesn't have the highest top end speed to hang with the faster guys in the NFL, but I don't hate this pick. I think with some development, Igbinosun could be pretty good. Jude Bowery at the very top of the 4th round was a bit of a reach in my opinion. He's an athletic tackle that gets out of his stance quickly, but doesn't use his hands well and did miss multiple games in 2025 due to injury. I also just don't think he was overall that good in pass protection. Bowery was more of a late 4th to 5th round guy for me, so it's not a horrible reach, but it's still a reach nonetheless. Gallibo later in the 4th was a great pick, however. He's an explosive athlete with great movement skills, and the hands aren't bad either. He's also really good after the catch, and I think he can be good in that Khalil Shakir type role. He did play at UConn where the competition level wasn't great. He will be 24 years old as a rookie, and he's not the biggest guy, but I think there is definitely way more good than bad with Bell, and this was a great pick. Caleb Alarm-Zor with the pick after was also a good pick. Run defense is his calling card. He flies to the football with 4.47 speed and is a really sound tackler. As a coverage player, he's more limited, but I think he can be a very solid early down run defender for this team. Jalen Kilgore in the 5th round was another great pick. He's listed as a safety, but is going to be a slot corner in this league, and I think can be a pretty good. He's got all the size, length, and speed you look for in the slot, and his run defense was really good. He can shed blocks and isn't a bad tackler either. The coverage is a little more spotty. He had really good ball production, 7 interceptions and 14 pass pickups over his final 2 years, but he did get beat by slot receivers and man coverage. But towards the end of the 5th round, this was definitely a value, and I really like this pick. And then the final 4 picks the Bills made were all fine. Zane Durant is an athletic D tackle with a really good first step, but never had good production at Penn State, and his size and shorter arms really held him back at times. Taranio Pride is a smaller, speedy corner that tackles well but is limited in coverage. Tommy Doman is a punter, and the Bills already have a punter in Mitch Wisnowski, but now they have 2, I guess. And then Armaj Reed Adams is a lengthy guard that's not bad on the run game, but pass protection needs a lot of work and did commit a crap ton of penalties. And there were any UDFAs that stood out to me. Overall, I gave the Bills draft a C+. 2 of their first 3 picks were reaches in my opinion, and while they did make some nice picks on day 3, I overall think this was just an okay draft. Our final team is the Super Bowl run-ups, the New England Patriots, who smartly invested in their O-line with their 1st round pick. With the big 4 tackles off the board and Max Iannator as well, Lomo was the last tackle remaining that I was comfortable with in the late 1st or early 2nd round. This is right at the top of where I thought he could go, so I don't think it's crazy value, but this was still a good pick. Will Campbell really struggled in the playoffs last year, and I think there's a real possibility he moves into guard and Lomo starts at tackle. He's got a good get-off, which will help him, and I think with he and Will Campbell, the Patriots have a nice young duo offensive lineman to build around. Gabe Yakas in the 2nd round wasn't a bad pick, but not the best. He's got good size at 6'4", 260 pounds, and he's really strong, but he wasn't as good of a run defender as you would expect from someone with that size and strength. And with that size comes limited speed. He's also not a good tackler. He does his best work rushing the passer, and his wrestling background does help him with hand placement and body control, but honestly, I thought Romello Height was a better prospect who was still on the board, and there were a lot of holes in Yakas' game for a 2nd round pick. But I do think there's upside as a pass rushing edge rusher, and it wasn't the worst pick in the world. Neither was Eli Raridan at the end of the 3rd round. His physical tools are what stands out. He's 6'6" with a 4.62 40 and is an explosive athlete, but his hands aren't great, and he only had 1 real season of production in 4 years at Notre Dame. That was partially due to the 2 torn ACLs he suffered in the same knee in 2021 and 2024. I think Raridan has a lot of upside, but the injury concerns are real, and there are other things he has to improve on. I already mentioned that hands, but he's also not the best blocker. He gets too tall in his stance and isn't the most well-built player at 245 pounds. If he can stay healthy, then I'm excited to see what he can do, but this was a risky pick in the 3rd round. They then didn't pick until the end of the 5th round, where they took Karen Prunty. He was decent in coverage and had good ball production, but his trades aren't the best, and he did miss a fair share of tackles. Demetrius Kronover in the 6th round was a pick I wasn't a fan of. I did not think Kronover was a draftable prospect. The physical tools are what's intriguing. He's 6'7" with ridiculously long arms and a 5'1" 440-yard dash, which is very respectable for his size, and Conover wasn't horrible as a run blocker, though he wasn't very good, but he was awful in pass protection. Having a 6.3% pressure rate allowed barely flies in the NFL, let alone college. He plays upright, he's way too late with his hands, and he also committed 11 penalties in 2025. It's truly hard to mess up a 6th-round pick, but I would be surprised if Conover even makes this team. Nnamdi Obiazor was a fun pick at the end of the 6th round. He's got height and speed, but is undersized at just 229 pounds and was unable to hold up in coverage. The tackling was good though. Baron Morton was a fine pick in the 7th round. The C- is only because Garrett Nussmeier was right there, who was a much better prospect, but other than that, I don't really have much else to say. Morton is a prototypical backup pocket passer that'll compete for the QB2 job with Tommy DeVito. Yeah, Miller's a speedy running back that couldn't produce at a high level at Alabama. His production really fell off in 2025, but there is some intrigue with the speed. And Quintavious Hutchins is an undersized edge rusher that moves well and was actually a pretty good tackler, but that's about it. And there weren't any UDFAs that stood out to me. Overall, I give the Patriots draft a C. They had one pick I liked, one pick I didn't like, and everything else was pretty average. But that's it. Those are my draft grades for every draft pick and every NFL team. I think the teams with the best drafts were the Panthers, Eagles, and Bucks, and I think the teams with the worst drafts were the Jaguars, Rams, and Cardinals. What do you agree? What do you disagree? Comment below. If you enjoyed this video, then please drop a like and subscribe if you're new. This video took a ton of time to make, so I would really appreciate it. But that's it for me. See ya.